Your frontal cortex, and this is a bit of a difficult one, whānau, your frontal cortex is here. Basically, to make this easier, you've got 4 brains inside your head, and brain number 4 is the frontal cortex. We call it brain number 4 because the brain grows from the bottom to the top. That means it's evolved, the eldest one to have evolved is brain number 1 down the base, and the most recent one to evolve is the frontal cortex, brain number 4, because it's at the top. It's evolved from the bottom to the top, it comes online across your life from the bottom to the top. It works on a day-to-day basis from bottom to top. It's a universal principle of brains. They tend to work bottom to top, inside to outside. So the frontal cortex is the last one to come online, brain number 4. There's brains 1, 2 and 3 first. But an easy way for you to understand how important the frontal cortex is for your baby is basically brains 1, 2 and 3, your dog has those 3 brains as well. So they are important, but it gives you some idea of how important the frontal cortex is. Everything you want for your baby that the dog can't do is going to be in that frontal cortex. Now, why is that relevant to you to need to know what the science of the brain is? It's because basically brains 1, 2 and 3 are sort of largely compulsory. They're largely driven by genes. So what that means is that as long as you fed the baby, watered them, kept them alive, brains 1, 2 and 3 will largely roll out. The lower in the brain it is, the truer that is. It's really true for brain number 1. Not as true for brain number 3, but still largely true. But really it's brain number 4 is the one that isn't really driven very much by genes and is more driven by the environment. So a simple way to say that is that brains 1, 2 and 3 are pretty compulsory. Feed the baby, keep them alive, you get brains 1, 2 and 3. Brain number 4 is optional. The frontal cortex is optional. That's where all your child's brilliance is, not just everything that makes them brainy. Because I mean, obviously the dog can't read, the dog can't count, the dog can't use complex language, so all of that's in the frontal cortex. But also empathy is in the frontal cortex. The ability to connect with another human being, the ability to control your emotions, to see things from other people's point of view. Basically everything that makes you a nice person is also in the frontal cortex. So we really, really want it as parents. But it turns out, what we discovered in the 1990s is that it's optional. You don't grow a frontal cortex because, you know, some Albert Einstein or Aparana Nata, or you don't have a frontal cortex just because it's in your genes to be brilliant. You grow a frontal cortex dependent on the data that you gather in the first 1,000 days of life. Now there's another segment you can go to talk about the first 1,000 days of life, but I just want to get you to really understand what a frontal cortex is. And so it'll be helpful if you've got a quick understanding of what brains 1, 2 and 3 are. So brain number 4, the frontal cortex, everything you can do that the dog can't do. So don't make it overly complicated. Any function at all that you can think of, the only question you've got to ask, or if you can do it, and you want to know if it's in the frontal cortex, the only question you need to ask yourself is, can the dog do it? Because, you know, reading, well, you can do it, but can the dog do it? No, he can't. So if reading was in either brains 1, 2 or 3, the dog would be able to do it because he's got those brains. So reading must be in brain number 4 because you can do it and the dog can't. Language must be in brain number 4 because you can do it and the dog can't. Feeling happy, yeah, that one doesn't have to be in brain number 4, does it? Because your dog can feel happy. So happiness must be in brains 1, 2 or 3. You getting the idea? If you can do it and the dog can't, it's in this frontal cortex. So, brain number 1, right down the very base of your brain, back here at your neck, is your brain stem. It's your survival brain. Keeps your heart beating, keeps you breathing, does all your survival stuff. And we're going to use, for brain number 2, the bulge out the back of your head, the cerebellum. Think of that as being the movement brain. So brain number 1 is survival, keeps your heart beating, keeps you breathing, keeps you alive. That's where the home of fight, flight or freeze is, the disaster response. And then brain number 2 is your movement brain. Sometimes they jokingly call brain number 2 the sports brain just because it's so involved in movement and coordination. But yeah, survival, number 1, movement, number 2. Now if that's all you've got, survival and movement, and that's it, then you're a reptile. That's called the reptilian brain. That's all reptiles have, is a survival brain that keeps them alive and a movement brain to move around. To have brain number 3, you have to be a mammal. So it's often just called the mammal brain, brain number 3. Its real name's the limbic system, but you can just understand it as the emotional brain. So if you're with me, your reptile has got survival and movement. So that's what your pet snake's got. But your pet dog is a mammal. So he's got survival, movement, and emotion, right? Understanding that? So when you get home from work, you can tell the dog's really pleased you're home from work. You can't tell if the lizard's really pleased or not. Because the lizard doesn't have emotions to be really pleased, because he's only got survival and movement. It's your dog that's got survival, movement, and emotion, and all mammals. So that means your child, with this wonderful frontal cortex that we want to grow, it's like the roof being built on top of the floor and the walls. And the floor and the walls are survival, movement, emotion, and then thinking and learning, number 4. They're the stages your baby grows up through their development too. None of you had babies that were born and started talking a week later, because talking's in brain number 4. Brains have to develop number 1, then number 2, then number 3, then number 4. So none of you had babies who were talking at a week old. None of you had babies that were walking at a day old. You know, a horse might walk at a day old, but humans don't do that because movement is brain number 2. Basically, a horse gets up and walks when it's born because it's doing brain number 1, like every creature is, survival. The difference is a horse survives, its major survival technique is to run away from predators. So it's born ready to stand up. Now, if nature can arrange that for a horse, it could certainly arrange it for us. The reason we don't stand up straight away and relegate movement to brain number 2 is because we've got a better survival method than movement. Our survival method, most successful on the planet, it's called attachment. We basically spend the first 6 months getting someone to fall so mad, crazy in love with us that by the time we're 6 months old, most of us have secured a person that's actually willing to die in order to protect us. Actually, push comes to shove, most of us by 6 months old have someone who's willing to kill to protect us. So attachment is an incredibly powerful form of survival, much more effective than running away. So that's what the baby spends the first 6 months doing. Really focused on getting you to fall in love with them. And they do that through things like, say, gazing into your eyes. Might not seem like a miracle to you that the baby can hold their head in one spot and look at you, but actually when you understand brains, holding your head in one spot takes quite a lot of brain development. I mean, this is why lizards don't do it. You know, you think of a reptile, they're like this all of the time, because actually to hold your head in one spot and to gaze takes quite a lot of brain development. So it's a miracle that your baby can do that when they're born, but they're doing that because that's what facilitates their survival. They gaze into your eyes, you release a little bit of a hormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin's the love hormone, so it's what makes you feel all loved up and attached. In fact, you know, when you look at a baby or someone places a baby in your arms and you get that feeling, that's oxytocin largely. So baby gazes into your eyes, you release oxytocin, that releases oxytocin in the baby's brain, and that starts the snowball process that is their brain development. This is why essentially babies like lying in an orphanage who are being fed, having their nappy changed, still don't develop in typical ways, because no one's gazing into their eyes and giving them that loving care that releases the oxytocin that helps to facilitate that whole process. So that's what a baby's doing when they're first born. I don't get too stuck on the ages here, whānau, because these are, remember, we're just talking about the average, but let's say that's 0 to 6 months. And then 6 to 18 months, we do our movement brain. So you'll notice that your baby at 6 months old is happy to be a blob in your arms for a lot of the day, and 1 year later, by 18 months, they can walk, crawl, run, climb, you know, use the pincer grasp and twist the body in opposing directions. All these complex motor skills come online in pretty much a year period, between 6 and 18 months, where they do brain number 2. So you're following that and getting you to see that human beings all develop through brains 1, 2, 3, and 4. You don't want to be trying to teach your baby the alphabet in the first 6 months. I mean, it's going to do no harm to sing the alphabet to them, but it's the singing that's doing the good because it's making the child feel safe and connecting them to you and meeting their need for attachment. Really, the baby 0 to 6 months does not really care about the alphabet because that's something that's going to be up in the frontal cortex, but certainly singing to them is wonderful. So, between 6 and 18 months, all that movement stuff comes online. Most of that's programmed into your brain. For the typically developing child, you don't really teach them to walk. You're not really going to help them with a jolly jumper learn to walk. It's going to slow down their ability to walk. Really think of their motor skills as being like a flower blooming. You don't have to teach the rose to bloom. It doesn't help the rose to go out into the rose garden and grab the petals and peel them out early so that your flowers bloom before the neighbours do. So don't worry about what rate other people are doing things in the antenatal class. Rather than take charge of your child's development and try and stick them into baby traps and try and stand them up early in order to facilitate their movement, actually that will slow their movement down. Letting the baby be in charge of their movement and letting them decide when they're ready to stand up, when they're ready to move, when they're ready to roll over, and you're just there to facilitate it and make them feel safe, that's the baby who's going to get the best brain number 2. So, brain number 1, brain number 2, then around 18 months to 3 you move into the limbic system, the emotional brain, so you probably think of that as the tantruming 2s. But yeah, if you've got a better attitude, it's the terrific 2s. But basically being 2 is really difficult. Your emotions come from brain number 3, but all your ability to control emotions comes from brain number 4. So at 2 you've got brain number 3, but you don't even know brain number 4's there hardly. So when I do dad's groups, I'll say, think of it as a car and the accelerator is the limbic system, your emotions, and the frontal cortex is the brakes. So at 2, the child has found the accelerator, their foot's flat on the accelerator, they're experiencing the full intensity of emotion, but they don't even know there is a brake pedal yet. You have to be their brake pedal. You have to distract them, soothe them, sing to them, do what you need to calm them down. It's only around 3 that they're really going to finally discover that there is a brake pedal. And then they're going to work out those brakes are largely unreliable until they reach adulthood. But at least at 3, they know there is a brake pedal there. So 2 is a very emotional age because the child's in the limbic system. It's only really around 3 that we typically start to really see that frontal cortex move into centre stage development. So we'll talk lots more about that, but I wanted you to understand where the frontal cortex was and its development within normal human development. Kia ora whānau.